Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Olajide and thank you for joining us again this week on our third episode of season 3. It's a pleasure to be here, and today we're going to be having a very interesting conversation with an organization that's very much like ourselves. Well, I guess that's not entirely true, more like an organization that we strive to be like. So today we're speaking with the founder and director of Energy Dialogues. I'm going to be speaking about how the conversation around energy changes on a very high level in regards to climate change and the energy transition. Also, I should add, Energy Dialogues is one of the reasons that I started this podcast. It's one of the platforms that I personally followed quite a lot, and I still follow actually. That kind of gave me the inspiration to start this platform. And I got very inspired by the way they were able to facilitate conversations for people in different sectors and people at different levels of seniority and expert levels. And I feel like it's something that's still very important, especially as we continue to grow ourselves. And I really hope you enjoy this conversation because it's very special to me personally and to us as a platform. So without any further ado, let's have a conversation with Monika, and I hope you enjoy this one.
Sure. I'm Monika Simoes, and I'm the founder and managing director of Energy Dialogues. Energy Dialogues is a network of leaders in the energy industry, and I think we'll get into that a little later. But specifically, as far as I'm concerned, I grew up in Europe, grew up in Germany with Hungarian parents, and was exposed to a lot of different cultures. And I think that's a really good intro in how I got started in the energy space, and specifically what we as Energy Dialogues are doing today. Because I always felt that dialogue was really important, and engaging with people of different opinions and different perspectives. And whenever you want to have the best outcomes and best solutions, it really works best if you have dialogue and engage in conversations with people who have different perspectives and come from somewhere else and think differently. I studied economics and social anthropology, so not necessarily something extremely energy related. And then my first job was in conferences, and actually fairly accidentally energy. I remember my first conference that I worked on was in LNG, so liquefied natural gas, and I was fascinated by this industry from the beginning, and really never wanted to work in anything else because it's such a remarkable industry that is touching everything from just basic human life to history and politics, and really powers, no pun intended, how the world is running. And then I had the opportunity to work in a number of different countries and continents on various energy projects, conferences, big, small. I mentioned in the introduction to you earlier that I spent some time in Nigeria, and overall I had the opportunity to experience various energy-related topics during conferences in South America, in Africa, in Europe. Now, obviously, quite heavily focused on the U.S. and Mexico and Canada to an extent. And I think that's a little bit of an insight into how I got started. And then once I moved to California, I had the opportunity to bring to life what Energy Dialogues is today. And we're all about, I think the name couldn't be any better, because that's all we are about, is energy and dialogues within that, and ultimately solutions on how to build a better world.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just referring much earlier to before we started recording, you told me about how well traveled you are, referring to how you've also been to Abuja in the past. I think that really reflects the energy industry, really, because when I started the podcast, the very first guest I had was from a non-governmental organization in Peru, and ever since then we've had guests from pretty much every single part every single continent at this point, because it's something that I came to realize very early on starting the podcast, is to get a good appreciation for the energy sector and just the scope of the energy transition. It's something that you have to be open to so many different views and from people with so many different backgrounds, because it's all interconnected once you start to really get into it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I actually looked up some of the other podcasts you did, and I loved seeing how you're talking to a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds and in a lot of different places. And absolutely, I think we are, energy transition is such a buzzword today, and everyone is focused on it. But I always like to remind myself and everyone I'm talking to that energy transition doesn't mean the same thing if you speak to someone in the US or in
Mm-hmm.
Denmark or in Nigeria or in India and
Mm-hmm.
really any other place. It's very different. And I think it's important that in all our conversations we keep in mind that there are differences, and the world has always been in transition, and the energy industry has always been in transition. Now we're referring to energy transition as something very specific, but again, it's not the same thing depending on where you go.
Hmm. I completely agree with that. And I think this transitions very nicely into the motivations behind energy dialogues. You kind of spoke briefly on it, but I just want to go a bit deeper as what was the need that you saw in starting the organization, and what are the aims, and how has that adapted over the years that it's been functional now?
Sure. So when we started Energy Dialogues, it really what it was initially one conference. And I always like to mention to the people I'm talking to that we started out with the North American Gas Forum in DC, and at the time, this was 2008, 2009, when there was the shale gas revolution underway, right? So we talked earlier about energy transition, and one of the things I always like to think about, a little over 10 years ago, the US was building LNG import terminals and suddenly figured out a new technology to make it, well, not a new technology because the technology was there, but to make it commercially viable. And suddenly there was this huge shale gas boom in the US, and everyone was talking about LNG exports. And going back to what I was saying, I heard a lot of people that was telling me, um, you know, we have the technology figured out. Now it's really about coming together as an industry and solving some of the bigger challenges. And it's a very fragmented industry, and we need to come together for dialogue. And that last
Mm.
sentence was really the driving factor for energy dialogues back then, and in many ways, though, in a much larger and much broader way today. So today, we are a global alliance and a network of industry leaders. That's what we say. What we really are is we found this niche where we bring people together that are willing to engage in dialogue, even if they don't necessarily, or often exactly because they don't necessarily agree. So rather than just bringing people together from one specific part of the sector on one specific technology or one specific issue, we like to go broader, and we like to create unusual connections, and we like to orchestrate those connections in a really thoughtful way. And as a team, we spend so much time on understanding and obviously talking to our entire network and really putting a lot of work and thought and effort into who should be part of the conversation, who should be part of the dialogue to really find the best solutions going forward. And I think that also nicely connects back to what I was saying earlier about how I got started in this. And I think that really translates today into how all of us in the team are thinking about this. And we don't just want to, obviously, as you know, one of the things that we're doing is we host a number of conferences. But those conferences are really just one way of building sustainable dialogue and pushing for solutions and building coalitions. And we really we really have found our niche in this, and that's how we have built our brand, and that's what people I think really see and appreciate. That every time they come together at something that is an energy dialogue, whether that's in person or obviously a lot of that virtually this year, but they're always exposed to new ideas and different ideas. And then what we see from there happening, coalitions are being built, collaborations happen. People come up with new ideas that then, because we make always sure that we don't just meet on the day or have one conversation, but we follow up, and we always follow up with everyone who's there, and we're asking them, what did you do with what you learned, with who you met, what new things came out of it. Because especially, I mean always, but especially maybe this year, we participate in so many events and conferences and talks, but very often it just stays in that one conversation. And I think there's a shift generally, because of course we're not the only organization that does put an emphasis on dialogue, and puts an emphasis on building really sustainable solutions forward. But it's nice to see that shift in general. And so our goal is to really just continue that momentum, and increasingly put energy dialogues initiatives at the center of the debate, and whether that's sustainability, energy security, energy access, a lot of different topics. So
Mm.
yeah, that's we want to just increasingly create those connections and build it.
Something that
Yeah.
I really appreciate quite personally about energy dialogues is the access to, or the kind of people that it brings to the conversations. Really, really high level people, and maybe it was just for me from where I started up, because once I got out of school, I didn't really have any connections. I felt very far away from the industry, so getting information was always something that I really had to search for. That's why I was so grateful when I found energy dialogues and just got this bank of really, really engaging conversations with people that I would usually never get access to. And it's something that has helped me learn. And I think access to information is always something that is important, especially here on our platform where we're speaking to a much younger audience that it's very easy for them to feel very far away from it. And you mentioned earlier that the energy transition is something that's in focus a lot more. But the pattern that I see personally is that you find people who are so interested in the topic, but they don't really know anything about it. They don't understand how complicated it is to just shift energy systems, and they don't appreciate how different it is for different countries to really embrace that transition. And that's something that I try to explain in so many conversations I have personally. And I know that it's something that that you deal with as well, but on a much different level. So I just want to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned, and it's good to hear that there is access. You feel there is access to information and exposure to new people, and it's again, it's what we really stand for, because we you probably noticed that we also are partnering with a number of universities that are leading in the energy sector: Stanford Natural Gas Initiative, Rice University, Baker Institute, Colorado School of Mines, Payne Institute, and a lot of others. And we do these, we call them city series, and these are smaller, by invitation only dialogues. And I mention this because one of the key factors and motivators for us to do this was to bring in the students who are related to energy in their studies, and we invite a student to each of these roundtables to participate in the conversation. And for us, one of the most fascinating and rewarding things we have seen is how much the students just engage, and sometimes they need a little motivation or encouragement, so to speak, because it can be a little intimidating to be at a table with some very experienced and accomplished senior level people in the industry, and be invited to share your opinions. But this is so truly what we believe as an organization, that everyone's opinion matters. So if someone who has just recently graduated or is in their last year in university they have opinions, and it's important to share those. And it's so rewarding and valuable to share those opinions in a setting like this, where we, as of course one of the big challenges of the energy industry is how to attract new talent and how to make this industry that can seem a little old and outdated and polluting attractive to a younger generation. But that is
Mm-hmm.
also another thing that we have focused on so much, because um, maybe I can get into this later a little bit more, but what an amazing industry to work in, and what an amazing opportunity to, as a student, to get engaged in some of these conversations and see how they can come in as the new generation and lead and be part of the solution. I might have
I
gone
can.
on off a little bit on a tangent there, but I hope at least partially I answered the question.
Yeah, I actually want to dive a bit deeper on that. So how over the last few years, you mentioned that it's becoming the energy industry has been looked at a lot differently. In 2014, when I first started my petroleum engineering program, everybody who was really a really smart engineering student usually wanted to go into the oil and gas sector. It was a very attractive prospect, especially for me coming from countries like Nigeria and Qatar, which is why I grew up mainly in these two countries, and they have very strong oil and gas industries. So it kind of became like the natural choice for someone like me. But now the conversation has shifted a lot in a very short amount of time. And I just want to ask from your perspective with Energy Dialogues, how have you seen the conversation shift? And what is it like when you have senior level people talking about these issues? What do they really focus on? Because you mentioned one about attracting talent. Are there others that have come up frequently in your recent conversations?
Right. So, my observation of this, just to put things into context, is um, about 15 years now that I have from where I started seeing the conversations first and where I see them now. And clearly, the topics have changed a lot. And what has also changed, which I find really interesting, is the energy industry in the past has typically been an industry that no news were good news. When you didn't hear anything, things were going fine and people didn't pay necessarily much attention to it. Today, of
Mm-hmm.
course, that is absolutely the opposite. Also, because there is so much out there in terms of social media and communication, and then what now is really at the center stage is, there's public opposition to oil and gas. There is investor activism and shareholder, or I should say, shareholder activism and investor pressure, and then policymakers who um, work on different issues as well. And in all of this, and I don't want to focus too much on what's going on this year, because of course, with with COVID right now, there's a whole lot of other issues as well. But I think we hear about that so much that maybe we don't necessarily have to focus on that much right now. But ultimately, there are just a whole lot of different pressures and challenges coming in. So I think that has definitely changed. And right now, I mean, a lot of the conversations we're having are around ESG, around energy transition, around how to solve issues around methane emissions and flaring. Those topics have never been that much, I would say, discussed. And of course, that is, my specific opinion, or that what I'm experiencing. I would say though that those issues have always been, the industry has always been doing what they could, and always, I would say, it's an industry that wants to do well, like really all other industries, because we are all. I like to say this, and and this is, I think that we're all at our core, we're all environmentalists. We all want the world to be a cleaner and better place. We all want to have things clean. Then it's just about how does that specifically look like? And the more you learn about facts and how things work, there are always trade-offs and challenges and issues. But what has definitely encouraged me a lot in all these years is there's there was this shift towards trying to do things as sustainable and clean as possible. And then something else that I would add is that I think in the past a lot of things were very market driven in terms of just creating solutions that are sustainable and clean and reducing methane leakage and other things, um, because it's a product, right? I mean, this is very specific now, natural gas, but we're hearing so much about methane these days. And but often when I talk to people in industry, they say, yes, of course, we have to solve this issue. But methane is also a product; it's gas. And so there is a market driven motivation to reduce leakages. But I think in terms of your question of what has shifted, I think now there's a lot of there's more of an urgency even than before, because to the market driven approach now you also get the the external pressures of doing things, and kind of accelerating these transitions. Also the thing that has shifted a lot is companies are talking a lot more about coalitions and collaborations. In the past, it was companies were doing what they were doing, and now, and this goes back to something I mentioned earlier about how when we first did one of our natural gas conferences, and there was this feedback about how fragmented this industry is and how we have to talk more about coalitions and collaborations. I think that has shifted, is that the industry as a whole and companies specifically are realizing that there are some very big challenges as well as some very big opportunities, and to solve the challenges and maximize the opportunities, we have to do it collaboratively. It can't just be one company um, announcing net zero carbon goal by 2050 or 2030, or different companies are coming up with different things, but it has to be more than that. It has to be the industry collaboratively working on achieving those goals.
Mm. And I think it's fair to kind of attribute most of this accelerated pace to the effects of climate change and the need to drive down emissions. And it's very interesting you mentioned about this coalitions forming, because recently you had an interview with one of the directors from the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which I found was a very, very interesting conversation. And for those who don't know, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative is a consortium of the CEOs from 13 major oil and gas companies working together to come up with a strategy for them to address climate change. And it's just so amazing because a few years ago, something like this is something that probably would never have worked, but now it's something that it's going more of a necessity. And how do you see this trends kind of moving forward in terms of what you're doing right now?
I think it will continue. I think it will, if anything, it will accelerate, and more and more companies will join, and like a lot of other things. I mean, different technologies and different other initiatives will sometimes exponentially grow. Something that OGCI obviously doing a great job, and I think it's so important to have some of these big oil and gas companies come in, or I should call them energy companies at this point, right? Because everyone is diversifying a lot and looking at new solutions. But what I think, I mean, what they're doing is really important, and we we do. I mean, in many ways, what we do in our dialogues, we mirror and anticipate how the energy landscape is shifting. And one of the really fascinating conversations we always have is we do this annual energy dialogue city series with Stanford Natural Gas Initiative. And something we have been focusing on lately a lot is to bring in some of the typical Houston-based energy companies, big old legacy energy companies with the Stanford and Silicon Valley startup community and new technologies and a much younger industry, of course, and how to have those two worlds collide in a positive way and in a successful and efficient way. That is something that we find incredibly fascinating and promising, because ultimately, again, it goes back to having all parts of the value chain represented. But so what big opportunities can come out of pairing those two and capitalizing on everyone's strength and everyone's knowledge, and now you see so many partnerships between Shell and Microsoft and Google, and Google is all over and now with some of the companies based in Texas, and that will all, I think, incredibly accelerate. I do also think that it's important to put this in a balanced view and balanced perspective, which is that, whether it's the Shell Sky scenario or the IEA's Sustainable Development scenario, both of those, and they're not the only ones, but they have very aggressive decarbonization scenarios that they are seeing going forward. But at the same time, they see ongoing long-term role for oil and gas. And I think that again goes back a little bit to where we were saying earlier, that energy transition isn't the same thing everywhere. And in Europe and the US and Canada, which accounts for a little under a billion people, we're talking very much about renewable energy and moving away from oil and gas and just increasing the renewable percentage of energy. And I think that's fantastic and it's great and it's important. But we also shouldn't forget that we still have 7 billion people in other parts of the world. And that's a little generalized, of course, but those are more or less the numbers. And a lot of those people have no meaningful access to energy, and they are burning wood, and there are a lot of coal-fired power plants right now under construction. And I think we should be pushing for sustainable solutions and clean energy everywhere, and at the same time keep in mind that those tools we have are different in different parts of the world. And so I always like to look at it in that balanced way as well.
I completely agree with that. The topic of energy access is something that we've covered quite a lot on this podcast, and something that we'll continue to cover because, as you said, I think many people, especially when they're from developed worlds, they kind of forget that there's just so many people who don't have just basic access to energy, and even the people who do have basic access to energy, they have very intermittent supplies, so it's not from clean sources. So this is a very much broader issue, and I feel like more people now are beginning to appreciate that. But I still think personally, as a Nigerian, it's still not enough, especially from the international community. But kind of coming back to where Energy Dialogues is positioned. As you mentioned before, you cover mostly North America, some parts of Mexico and Canada, and those regions are very leaning towards the oil and gas sector. So was it a bit of foresight to name it the Energy Dialogues and not the Oil and Gas Dialogues? And how is this broader conversation about the energy transition affecting the Energy Dialogues going forward? And how do you see it being positioned for the future of this industry?
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that question. We it was foresight. I think it was also that we never we don't advocate for a specific energy source, and that's always what we like. Obviously, everyone, you can ask everyone in at Energy Dialogues about their opinion personally, and we all have one. But as an organization, we don't advocate for one energy source over another. We want to be part of building the most sustainable energy landscape globally forward. We recognize the importance of connecting people in the industry, outside of the industry, for dialogue, because again, I think that's how you reach the best solutions. We see a lot of opportunity in creating these sustainable solutions, and so we, to be honest, we couldn't have named it anything better than Energy Dialogues, I think. And it's funny because I won't give any examples, but I have seen over the years there are some organizations that were called something different and then they changed. And I actually, when Energy Dialogues, when the name came about, I hadn't seen much out there that was called Energy Dialogues. There was really actually nothing. I remember we did, like every company when they begin, they do a little research, right, on what's out there in terms of their name or related to their name. And I remember it just came, the name just came, and it was so obvious that this was the right thing to call it. And I smile sometimes these days because I look and it's energy dialogues everywhere. But since you asked, I will say yes. We really came up with that name initially, and it's not a trademarkable name because it's something that people do, right? They use in energy dialogue. But I'm very glad that we called it that because it really reflects truly what we do. And again, we're not saying this energy or that energy. We create the connections, and we are an enabler, and we just want to be a valuable part of the conversation and of the solutions going forward.
I think that's actually very well said. And going forward now, what are you looking forward to? Obviously, we can't ignore the current events with the pandemic and everything having to kind of like pivot away from in person events and all these things. But what expectations do you feel the people coming into the dialogues would have now going forward, and what developments are you personally looking at and being excited for the future of your future events?
If anything, this I think this year has shown that we need to keep connecting, and we need
Hmm.
collaboration, we need coalitions. And this year obviously has been difficult for the energy industry. It has been difficult for anyone that is connecting people in the energy industry because a lot of that has completely fallen away. And I think all of us are being quite trying to be creative and hopefully being creative in bringing solutions differently to people. But what I have found very encouraging in all of this is the continued feedback and the affirmation from our partners and our network that this dialogue is so important, and we can't just stop it. Even if right now we can't come together in person, we have to continue it because we can't exist in a bubble. We can't just come up with our own solutions within our company. We have to keep doing this in collaboration. And I think, if anything, now companies are do want to do even more of that. Now, I don't want to diminish the challenges that are out there because clearly there are, and they continue. In addition to the challenges I mentioned earlier, it's just how to recover from a global pandemic and what will happen. And it's still a little unsure, right? We don't know. For us, we don't know when we can come together next for something in person. But in the meantime, we continue to do the same we're doing now. We're continuing to address the trends and kind of see looking forward, and also seeing how we can continue to bring people together with different perspectives and new topics, and driving some of the opportunities out there. We have new topics that we are increasingly looking into, all related to sustainable energy solutions going forward and energy transition. And I think we just will continue to do what we've been doing, and if anything, just increase that dialogue.
Thank you for listening to the episode. It's great for you to join us another week. Season 3 is up to a very good start. This is just our 3rd episode. We're getting really close to our 50th episode of the podcast, and we hope to do a special episode with me and the rest of the team. I'm sure you've not heard the voices of Jennifer and Owosa in a very long time, and we're going to be coming together again at the end of at the 50th episode to do a special recording, a bonus episode like we used to do in the past. So thank you again for joining us. I hope you continue the conversation with us by following us on Twitter, on Instagram at The Energy Talk. Don't forget to share this with a colleague or a friend. If you want to help us out massively, you can leave us a rating or a review. And it's a pleasure to be your host again this week. Thank you so much again to Bina for your help in getting this episode ready. We wouldn't have been able to set this up without you. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this one. We'll see you next week. Have a lovely day.